President of the United States, that barrier was immediately broken. The Tuskegee Airmen or in Europe. And that's individually my story, which I know. But I tell you, young people, this, because as Bernard has indicated, one of the ways to destroy more quickly a people's history is to destroy the physical, where people made history. Then the viewer or the listener has to use their imagination, but if the building, the statue is still there, they can learn that history from the beginning. And that's why we have so many historical things all over Europe and Asia, because the people who built those buildings or whatever, someone wanted that history to be carried into generations afterward. And 43rd Street and some of the other streets on the south side particularly, where the runaway slaves and others who left the South for three basic reasons. That is to, first, to be able to fight back if they were attacked by the Ku Klux Klan and bad folks like my daddy, pardon my vulgarity, young people, but people like him, men in particular, but women as well, would consider, pardon my vulgarity, look it up, badass niggas. Because if they were attacked, they would fight back, usually they get lynched. That was one reason. The other was to be able to vote and be outvoted on a percentage basis. They outvoted the immigrants from Europe on a percentage basis. First black congressman in the United States after Reconstruction was from Chicago, the South Side, Oscar the Priest, who lived near 43rd Street. And businesses, small businesses, where we could work hard. The dollar turned around at least 6 times because we couldn't spend our money outside.
Let me, so
Yeah, okay,
on that note, I just want to make sure that everybody who may not have known of you has a short introduction to you.
Okay, I was listening to that statement, and I broke it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which was a wonderful segue into it. But we're just so pleased, Tim, to have you here with us. For those of you who do not know Tim Black, he celebrated his 100th birthday last December. In fact, there's a couple.
Without contradiction, that I can see all of you here. I used to be your age. Keep on, keep the faith. Yeah. But also be prepared. Have the confidence that the closed door, whatever that door is closed by, race, gender, denomination, whatever, have the faith. The door is going to open. Be prepared to walk in.
And Tim speaks from experience here because after he moved to Chicago as a very young child.
Oh, that's another story.
That's another story. I'm not going to tell that story. He has participated in all of the major events in history. Okay. In Bronzeville during the Depression years, growing up with Nat King Cole and other friends, participating in World War II in Europe, helping to bring Martin Luther King to Chicago and marching with Martin Luther King, helping to elect Harold Washington. And really in the last 20, 30 years, and throughout his career, being a storyteller about Bronzeville. If you have not picked up his most recent book, I just read it over my kids' spring break. It's a wonderful book. He has several other books. And we're just delighted to have you here. So Tim is going to speak more about 43rd Street. He'll take some questions.
Oh, I'll be honored, and I'm not claiming to have a memory that's so keen, young people. But I do know the area, and I do know of events along 43rd Street, and buildings that may have been preserved. I may know something. And if there's a particular space or building, ask me the question about it, and I may be able to give an answer. But the street, as I remember it in the early days, was a lively street where we dumb young people walked the streets day and night. But there were places to go, movie houses, and for some of us, practice places where young musicians like Nat King Cole could work out and have us. We couldn't buy anything, drinks, or anything, but we could have soft drinks, but we listened to the music, and they enjoyed having those of us who were their peers criticize. One place, 43rd, near the L, right outside there, and across the street, blues, all that. So 43rd, some of those musicians wrote music about 43rd Street. Was an exciting place. That wasn't the only place, but it was, let's go to 43rd Street. We all laugh and let's go to 43rd Street. So I can share some of that personal history with these young people.
So you went to school with Nat King Cole?
He sat right in back of me. We didn't know the man could sing because see, that's another part of our history. Captain Walter Henry died, not produced, they were already talented musicians. But it's Dorothy Donegan, singer that some of you may have heard of, Dorothy Donegan, told me, Cap, I used to wonder, how in the world does anyone stay in that man's class? Because he was say, play like Johnny Hodges. God damn it. and that person he's talking to would say, oh, Cap, I'm gonna try. So Dorothy Donegan, so he taught him two things. Discipline, self-discipline with the instrument, and teamwork. And the bands that so Nat was, because most of those young people could already play. They were, again, when we look at the institutions in 43rd and the other inspiration, they were already being trained outside of school. There were a lot of music places around the area. And their parents had some background. So Nat King Cole, his whole family. And so we thought, Dorothy Donegan said he taught discipline and teamwork. And big bands, those young people were part of the big band. And those young people who couldn't, they were encouraged by people like Earl Father Hines and others. And Nat Cole was admired that piano player who had his own band, not too far away, by the way. And so there was an inspiration as well as information. And Cap died was a teacher, the school named after him now, that stimulated those young people to believe that there was gonna be a better world. Get ready. So Nat told me I couldn't play anything. I wanted to play alto sax, but my mom wanted me to play piano. And so I wound up playing nothing. But I was a pretty good listener. And Nat sat in back of me at Wendell Phillips High School. That's another story you may have heard even on television about the Harlem Globetrotters. Mm-hmm. They were not from Harlem. No. They were from Chicago on the South Side.
I didn't know that.
And many of them taught us younger people. We were younger. They were then called the Savoy Big Five, which was named after and sponsored by black business people who had businesses. They were named and supported Savoy Ballroom, which used to be at 47th Street and what was then South Park. They were friends. So that was typical. Nat King Cole and his colleagues had experiences along streets, 43rd Street being one. And we would come to listen to them. We couldn't go inside because of the law, but we'd stand outside. Didn't have air conditioning, can you imagine? In those days, the doors were open, and they would come out and say, how'd we play? How'd we sound? Well, it didn't sound good to us. You better go and practice some more. So, Nat, his model idol was Earl Father Hines. He could already play, but his model was Earl Father Hines, who played at a nightclub not too far away from where we are, the Grand Terrace. And that's another story, but that's a little bit of time I can't take me so. And Nat played the piano. When the teachers had a meeting, he was so talented and good that we would put a guard on one of us, guard on the door, and everybody who wanted to hear Nat King Cole had to pay to get it out class. That's a little known, a little show story, but we didn't think of it. The money was going to go to Nat. That's how good he was, because there were other good musicians listening to Nat. He was the leader of a big band, and the singer in the band was a young woman, I forget her name, who could really sing. And Nat told me that when the band left Chicago and went to Los Angeles, the person who had taken the band, the director, left with the money. And the band broke down, and Nat and two of his fellow colleagues formed the Nat King Trio, which you may hear. You hear the piano work on the Nat King Trio, that's Nat. But they went to a nightclub, and the owners told Nat, I want to have two musicians, a singer and an instrumentalist, and I can't hire two people. Nat started singing. And the rest is history. He could sing, I'm pretty sure, before, with his family and all. His father was a minister, his brother was, and of course later, you know, Natalie Cole, his daughter, was a musician. But I tell that story, young folk. The talent, be prepared, but also try to have more than one area in which you prepare. And then if things run out for you in that area where you've been so carefully, you have an alternative. You can keep on going. Now I know that not only from Nat King Cole's experience, but from Tim Black's experience. See, being a fairly independent person in a world that's not so liberal at times. I've been fired a lot of times because I wasn't what the boss wanted me to be, and this is black and white in terms of agencies I work for. But if one got rid of me, I just went to another. And they wanted me. So, and another part, I'm talking too much, I know.
Not at all. But we are gonna take some questions in a minute, so.
Yeah. But my father, who my mother was so glad that man that left the South, was, said to my mother one day, my father worked in a stockyard in a steel mill that your grandparents may have told you something about in other places or in Chicago. That's the reason they fled. My father told my mother, Mattie, pay the rent, that means place to stay. Buy plenty of food, that means have something to eat. And then he laughed at me and said, and get plenty of toilet paper. Idea being, with those items under your possession, you can be as independent as you want. But be prepared, the door is gonna open. Have that optimism, and there's a lot of proof. And 43rd Street was inspirational to see the businesses, to see the housing that other people more fortunate lived in. That whole area was inspirational and informational to those like myself who had a tendency to hang out with the hoodlums because they were much more fun than the others. They wouldn't let me be bad because they see I was so dumb. They were, but they were my friends. Now, that was the kind of model that we could walk up and down the street on 43rd and see the businesses and look at the housing that friends of ours. So, as I've said earlier, if I want to destroy a person's history, the easiest way is to destroy the physical. And if there's no one around to talk about the social and the cultural and the political, then how would they know? They wouldn't. So I feel a responsibility, Bernard, that when I'm asked to give my knowledge or my the memories to the younger people, then that crosses race and gender and all those other lines. Because of you, all of you younger people have older relatives. Go and talk with them sometime, ask grandma, grandpa, whoever was older. What was it like when you were growing? Where? And they'll start talking and you can't stop. Because they want to share. And I feel that same feeling. I'm sorry I talked too long.
So Tim, what and we'll open up, but what are your What are your earliest reflections of coming to 43rd Street? Is there something that stands out to you about 43rd Street?
Well, there was an organizing place at 43rd near the L. I think it's still there, the building.
Forum Hall.
Yeah, and musicians, young musicians like that, and Ray Nance and some, they would compete with one another, and it was exciting. We'd get on the L and come to 43rd Street. I was on the 51st Street. They'd come to 43rd Street and stroll, and there was I forget that's what 100 years does for you, your memory. But later, after World War II, when jazz and blues had become popular all over, the European and Asian musicians who liked that kind of music would come, and some of them, I forget the famous group that really, it's a group in your generation, I think, that really was inspired and went back to London, I think, and spread that music all over. But 43rd,
Checkerboard
Joe
Lounge.
is checkerboard, and that's Joe. Was it Joe Williams? No, anyway, the singer.
Yeah.
He used to come to 43rd Street to learn how to sing the blues. But he could sing already.
Right.
But that was a learning and nurturing. Now there were businesses as a result of attracting people for entertainment. There was a movie theater there that used to be there, and we used to go to that.
There was the Indiana Theater on Indiana and 43rd.
Absolutely, Indiana. You bring back a lot of memories. Thank you. Yeah, there was no reason to go outside of the community because 43rd Street offered all you could need, and younger people like you, younger people, and I used to be younger, the jobs that were there by the small businesses all up and down from Windward in terms of the black community, all the way to eventually along this 43rd Street to the lake. There were jobs, and we could work part-time while we were still going to school. We could work hard because the owners, their children also were part of the community. So there was a fellowship, a friendship across race lines and all the others. And I speak now from experience, not just from reading about it. And so that broke. I'm describing 43rd Street before and a little after the first great migration to Chicago. The second great migration was somewhat different, and things began to change after World War II. But they remained the same for many people, and 43rd was continuously a vibrant community until the decision by people in control to break down the attractiveness of 43rd Street so that they could control it and resell it the way they wanted it to be.
Wow.
But I tried to help along with young people like Bernard here to reinvigorate your thinking of 43rd being an example of doing what might have been thought of people that making that such an entertaining and economically interesting and in terms of the politics of life of police and participation, but we used to organize along 43rd, carry our missions to the residents, vote, get out and vote. And people felt an obligation to do that because we were unified in our demand that we wanted all of them to come into the place, the business places, talking politics. And the other, in the business, the small business, talk about their children going to school. How did Mamie do? How did Tim do in school today? There was a unification in 43rd because of the housing unity, and you look at the housing, north and south of the street, and those were not poor folks' housing. Those were nice, family-oriented residents and some single-family housing, but not tall stuff that people lose their friendship in. So, how don't we take some comments and questions?
Absolutely.
I'll ask a question. I know my mom talked about how she was over here at DuSable High School and her family got displaced when they did the Dan Ryan expansion. Do you remember that period?
Oh, absolutely. The Dan Ryan was almost built, I can say this with some, purposely where it was to keep people racially and separated. And when you look at the Dan Ryan as it was, and it was named after a politician who lived not too far from here, by the way, Dan Ryan. And when he passed, that was built. And it was built by the late, I'm doing a story about him, who was our famous mayor?
Dave.
Richard David.
Yeah. That was to keep the working class, black and white, separated. And it did for a while. And again, you see, it was, however, overcrowded with the second Great Migration. The population density almost doubled. It was almost double during the period of the first migration. And the schools were around, Forestville and schools like that were overcrowded, double shift schools. And as families, parents wanting their children to get good education, whenever the neighborhood, when the schools became overcrowded and the neighbor, if they could move, they moved. Not because they were dissatisfied with the people, but they wanted good schools and more space to live in. See, there were two great migrations, young people. And another thing historically to remember, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but descriptive. The people who left the South in the first Great Migration had lived in urban areas of the South. Vicksburg, Mississippi, New Orleans, Louisiana, Birmingham, where my family came from, Atlanta, Georgia. They had become accustomed to getting up in the morning at a certain time and getting to work, but being off. They knew something about daytime labor. And they seldom had more than 3 children. My mother would say when somebody had more, how are they gonna pay for it? Because in the urban areas of the South, children went to school rather than work in the field. And so education became very important for those children. And so the second Great Migration, which comes during the first Great Migration, fled the South. The second Great Migration, which comes during World War II, because new technical tools for the agricultural world had been created. For example, a cotton picker could pick more cotton in a day than 100 hand pickers. Those hand pickers had lived in rural areas most of the time. And they had 7, 8, 9 children. Those children were an asset. And now we get a difference too in 43rd Street again. We, snooty Negroes, we had something called city blues. W.C. Handy, St. Louis blues, Memphis blues, city blues. The newcomers had country blues. Now country blues was it was all up and down 43rd Street, and we had to come down to 43rd Street to hear Les Porter, who brought the music with him, however. So 43rd Street, all the way from Cottage Grove were country blues, and when you want to hear that beat and those lyrics, you came straight to 43rd Street. It was again, however, the separation that came between the first and the second Great Migration was a thing that has endangered the history of Bronzeville, or the Black Belt, as Robert Abbott called it. The history, and 43rd Street was an item of the future possibilities that inspired. And so when the second Great Migration came, it made it easier for the opportunists to take over the land, tear down the buildings and build new, and encourage young people like you to come and buy that land and create your own history without knowing anything about the enjoyment of the past history that made it possible. So the physical retention, regardless to how the business is made, the physical retention for aspirational, talented young people is important as you recapture the glory of that past history and give it a continuation that every once in a while you can get an older person to share his or her experiences. And take Sam Cooke, who used to play along for the gospel singer, though he could sing everything, that a change is gonna come. What role will you have in making that change, the kind of change that gives ordinary people the chance to do extraordinary things? And you can take the history of Nat King Cole and other the blues, and you can take that to prove that ordinary people do ordinary things. Of course, we can say they're ordinary, but they're not. But we can put that label on them, and that inspires because they have models that, see, I could take my children and say, see, that's where Nat King Cole used to play. See, that's where John H. Johnson used to live. See, and on and on. I can point to the physical, which cannot be denied. I can point to the social and the cultural and the economic. The fact that 43rd Street, young people like I used to be, could have a job after school that would help him or her be encouraged to continue. I'm talking too much, but I can't.
I think we may have time for one or two more questions.
LaDonna mentioned the Dan Ryan Expressway as being kind of something that, was in the destruction of the community. What about like the boarding houses? I remember as a kid, we had a sitter that lived in a boarding house, and we used to pick her up on Sundays, and she'd stay with us for the week, and we'd bring her back on Friday. So was that also something that helped with that, the boarding house?
Boarding house?
Yes, sir.
I think there was. I can't remember exactly the street, but young people coming from the South had, in that area, in that period, boarding houses to which they could come and work. I mean, they would live there and share each other. They had a lot of fun.
Okay.
And they would work and come back. And the person who was in charge of the boarding house, the person coming, oh, you bring back a lot of them. They didn't have to worry about food because the manager, or whatever they called it, would prepare breakfast, lunch.
Wow.
Most of them didn't get home for lunch, but dinner, and they would have fun. And very often, some of the musicians that we were talking about would be attracted because of this captive population to the boarding house to do entertainment. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. I understand.
Okay, but that, your boarding house, that was, I don't see those kind of houses as much. Oh, that was, yes, boarding house.
Marshall?
Who was your role model growing up?
But,
Your role model growing up?
well, my immediate role model was my daddy. And I say that my mama, and that's another story, my mama ran the house. Everybody made any money. My brother, my sister married early, but my brother, my daddy, they would bring the money and give it to my mama. She'd put it in a pot. One pot was for here, for rent. Other pot was for food, and the other pot maybe for clothing. But we had, now, but my father was a tough guy. And that wasn't unusual for that male. See, in that period of time, regardless to how much education the female might have had, she was usually a housewife. That didn't change until World War II. And so, my model for finding a job and working was my older brother and my dad. My model for behavior was my mother. And their relationship was so good with each other. My mama would tell me to do something, and my daddy would say, "Do what your mother say, boy." Well, I better not do it. Because in those days, my daddy would say, drop your pants, boy. I knew I was gonna get a whipping, not a spanking. But I wouldn't be mad because I know my dad, so that meant I had to be smarter when I did some dirty work. But, so the models, and then my older brother, who was 4 years older, he was a brilliant guy. He later became a very prominent lawyer. That's another story of the images, like my mama could say. See Dr. Dawson down there? See Dr. Dove? Successful doctors. They look like you. Well, they didn't look like me, but I knew what she was talking about. And so in that area, we'd go to Forestville or Willard or Fuller School, which is Fuller School. I went to kindergarten, which isn't too far away either. And we were friends. And their older relatives were models to which our parents could point to prove that you can, as Dr. King and some of us used to say, which we carry, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. Deep in our hearts, we do believe we shall overcome. And 43rd Street was an example of models which could help us overcome and the realities of what we needed to overcome. We lived along 43rd Street in a period called the Great Depression. Ask your grandparents about that. But 43rd Street, I'm using 43rd Street as one, was an example of being in the Depression but not being depressed. Because you saw so much success along the street as you went out that you wondered. We lived on 43rd Street, 43rd and Champlain, I think it was. But all of our models was such that we felt we can do that too. But the buildings that we lived in were livable. The places where we shopped were desirable. The fun that we had was right there. Why go anywhere else when you can go to 43rd Street? That was an attitude. Okay.
So with that, we want to just really thank you. Because
Thank you.
So great.
I feel so honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because I feel a responsibility to younger people to let them share with me, to help them share the experiences of a person who grew up in the neighborhood, which they may have some interest in knowing that history. Now, I'm not claiming to give in every detail. I think Bernard knows more about 43rd Street than I know. But I want to give enough of the experience and knowledge to inspire all of you to look back at that history, but feel a sense of need to go to the history of your own family, and you will find in your family history similarities of the belief that the future was going to be better, but the future is in your hand, and you were going to make that future as successful, different with different technology and all, but it's happy and successful. See, I have had bad times, but I've always felt that good times were on the way. And models like the joy of a street, like 43rd Street, might be 125th Street in New York, it may be other streets, but we have the opportunity to have 43rd Streets, like 43rd Streets in our life. And 43rd Street is just one example. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna